This video, I'd like to talk to you about what is possibly the most important thing in making your drawings look more professional and giving them some polish. And it's something that most people miss. This is called negative space. Now, I spoke before that normally when you look at an image, you might be so busy looking at the image that you just put it in the middle of the page and you don't look at all of the space around it. And yet all of the space around it is like the stage that you're on, and you're just putting something in the middle of the stage with no props or information. If I put a portrait here with nothing around it, it would just be a floating head. But with this portrait, I could put a color, pink, blue, gray, to help give the personalities of the subject matter be conveyed through the color. But if I put somebody's portrait here and I put nature around them, or I put buildings around them, or I put jail bars around them, I'm going to say three very different things about the portrait. So the space that is around your subject matter is called the negative space. This does not mean bad space. It doesn't mean unimportant space. Negative in this case is not bad. It's simply that I'm looking at this is the subject matter and the background is the negative space. If you have problems with backgrounds in your drawing, it means automatically that you're not seeing the negative space. Now, if I were to ask you to draw my hand, you might find that my hand is very difficult to draw as the subject. However, if I told you to draw 1, 2, 3, 4 triangles, triangles are pretty easy to draw. And if you look at the way, the shape of this triangle, and this triangle, and this triangle, when you look at those triangles, suddenly it pops out what that shape is. If you draw the triangle between my fingers, you not only have the length of my fingers, how far apart the fingers are, the depth of my fingers, it becomes much easier as you go around to see the actual shapes. If I were to draw a freehand like this, going slowly around each finger, probably by the time I got to the pinky finger, it would be wrong. However, this way I can see what is a smaller, wider triangle or a taller, thinner triangle. If I'm really noticing the edges of my paper, those triangles can really stand out much better. So for instance, let's see, what can I do playing around with the edges of my paper to help my drawing become better? If I look at this right here, you may see a W shape. You may not know how to draw fingers, but you know how to write a W or a V or a J. And often when you shift gears where you say this is a hand, but I could see an L or a J, I might be able to see a W, I might be able to see a V, I might be able to see part of a rectangle with a jagged edge on it, like a knife blade. I might be able to see a U shape. As soon as you start playing around with being able to see the space between my fingers, you will see that there are some pretty strong shapes there that make drawing my hands much more easy. If you've ever tried to draw a traditional chair, it's going to be the legs of the chair that are difficult, but if you look at the negative space of the chair, it works out real well. So for instance, on this one, I can see it pretty clearly. I can see, get a color that will show up. Let's see, I'll take a black. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this just because it's visually not necessary. And I'm going to see that here, I've got a very strong shape here, and I've got a very strong triangle right here. This negative space here, this little sliver right here, is very, very thin. And so it's a very weak part of the composition. So this space needs to either be wider or cropped down. You'll notice when you're starting to look at the tree that there are a lot of negative shapes in the tree. If I were to draw this triangle here and this rectangle here and this H kind of shape here, one bit of blue here and a bit of blue here. Here this tree is making another triangle. Now, I notice when I start looking here that this angle and this angle and this angle go together. That could be a good thing. This tree tends to frame this, but it could also be a negative thing. If I'm saying that the house is made of lines like this, and then I have a light line here and a dark line here, it may be visually confusing to the person who's never seen this photo as to how those relate. I think this tree does not break up the negative space very well at all. Imagine if I look at this space and it seems kind of blank. I can put some clouds in there, but let's say I want to put tree branches. What I would do is instead of focusing on the branches of the tree, I would start making good negative space shapes. Like see how there's a triangle here, and then I might have a triangle here, a dagger shape here. I think that these archways are very beautiful. So could I, in some way, have some branches that arched a little bit as they were breaking up the negative space? I'm not saying this is the correct composition yet. I'm just saying, here's what I'm looking at. So for instance, I might play around with breaking up this negative space so that I could get some good triangles in, but perhaps I could get some good arch shapes working in too. You know, an arch shape like this that's recognizable as a tree may actually pick up on some of these arch shapes. In buildings, the negative space are windows and doors. And of course, you couldn't really have a building without windows and doors. However, often you're so busy drawing the wall and the bricks that the windows seem like they're just holes or afterthoughts. However, you couldn't have these walls without these windows. But the other thing that's important on negative space is that it can often give you a valuable measuring tool. The negative space comes to the edges of the paper. So when I say that this comes here, it gives me the measuring tool of seeing whether it's a third or a quarter. So where this porch ends here and here, I have a good measuring space. So let me take this window, and if I start comparing this window with this window, and then I compare that window with this door and this door, I start getting a measuring device that can be quite useful. You'd be surprised how often the negative space here will show up somewhere else. And that's because a good photograph has good negative space. So this shape and this shape may be about the same size. I also might see that, for instance, this shape and this shape are about the same size. When I look at this banister here, do I look at the white of the banister or do I look at the negative space in the banister? I could work for a really long time getting each of these little tiny lines perfectly straight, but why should I do that if when I go into the negative space and emphasize the negative space, the banister appears automatically? Same with this decorative edging. If I come in here and just draw the negative space of the decorative edging, and I'm not drawing the gingerbread of the house, I'm drawing the negative space of the house, you'll find that the piece goes a lot more quickly. So we're so used to seeing that these are shapes that could be outlined that we don't actually see this negative space. In a drawing such as this, for example, I can see the positive space shape of this triangle here. But if I were to draw a line straight across, let me do that in something that will show up. There, I can see that there's a negative space here that's triangular. Now, I've got a lot of triangles going on in this piece, which make it kind of that's your compositional device. I mean, you're looking at triangular shapes. And so what might happen here is I might look at the negative space between the logs here, and I see a little triangle there, and I might, not see much here. So if I want to invent some shapes here, I know that my negative space shape tends to be triangular here. So anytime I can find shapes between the logs that are triangular, it might make for a more interesting composition. Okay, now as I'm saying that, you can see that there's this tree in the background. Look at how there are so many negative shapes in this tree. So I might see this X here, but if I were to see this shape, and then I were to see this shape, what you'll find is it gets to be a whole lot less confusing as to what you are looking at in the tree, because you may actually be looking at negative space. So if there are areas here that are clear and are triangles, I automatically know that this tree will go with or complement the main subject matter. It could also be that occasionally, I mean, you can have other shapes too. See, I see a rectangular shape here. Okay. Could be that if I see some shapes up here that are very confusing and I'm not quite sure how to draw them, I might then just go, well, I'm using kind of rectangular shape, triangular shapes here. So what happens if I just, as I start breaking the space up, I just look for suggestions of triangles, and those suggestions of triangles might be enough to actually help me get some structure to my piece. And so I could put in all kinds of other stuff around here, but because I've basically seen the negative space and seen that this is as important as this, a lot of times your negative space is more than 50% of your subject matter. If I were to put another tree over here, I would then know that what I would want to pick up on would be variations on these triangular shapes, because I know that if I kind of created these triangular shapes in a tree, I'll do this real quickly, maybe not very well, but quickly. See, every time I'm unsure of what I'm doing by creating a fake branch there, what I'm actually doing is I'm going, well, am I getting a triangle out of that? And so I might take a piece of tracing paper, trace out some of these shapes, and then flip those shapes over here if I wanted that to be a tree instead of shrubbery. So when you're looking at your work, seeing the negative space is incredibly important. For instance, on this piece, there is a distinct shape like that. So this negative space seems like a bowl. You could go around each one of these little trees and get lost in these trees and probably get them incorrectly. But I also notice that there's a bit of another crescent shape, moon shape like that. I also notice in this negative space that the dark black versus the blue does something along the lines of that. And by that, I mean, I notice that this is mostly blue and this is mostly dark. So in addition to seeing these shapes that are the negative shapes of the trees, if I were drawing this, I wouldn't draw the trees at all because I don't see the trees. The trees are black. What I do see is the sky between the trees. And if I can focus on the sky between the trees, then you'll see how much more quickly it is to actually accurately draw this image. All right, let's see. Sometimes the negative space is filled with things. So this is my positive space, and this is my negative space. And I might see here that I have these oval-like shapes here. I have an oval-like shape here, an oval-like shape here. So if I'm going to start drawing this, instead of drawing the flowers first, which maybe I'm focusing on the flowers so much I don't know what to do with the background. So what I'm doing here is I might put in this leaf here, then I might put in this leaf here, measuring it more carefully than I'm doing here. Then I might come over here and I might say, okay, in the negative space here, I've got something going on. Up here, I've got a negative space doing this. Okay, now once I just block in those very simple shapes like this, what happens is these three flowers have to fit in this space. So when I'm ready for the next step, which is going to be utilizing finding kind of basic shapes to work with, I have this circle here, I have this circle here, and I have this circle here. And the negative space here has a cut here. Now, I'm obviously not going to just go directly and draw in there, but I kind of have a map so that this flower is going to go in this general area. This flower is going to go in this general area. The other thing that can really help you with your negative space is sometimes if you choke up on it a little bit, kind of crop into it a little bit. So for example, in a previous example I showed you that if I go like this, I'll see these triangles right here. I might see this triangle shape here. So in the negative space, sometimes reminding myself that I might, like right in here, have a shape that looks like that. This shape becomes this shape. Up here, this W shape now I'm not looking at the petals, I'm looking at this. And then I have a deep V shape here. As I start looking at these shapes, I'm going to look at the shape. It ran out of space. Okay, I think you see what I'm talking about. None of these are going to be my final line, and that all of these are going to get erased. But I know that if I'm looking at this negative space, it can be very confusing as to which petal or leaf I'm doing here. And if I start here, where do the petals end up so that I can keep track of them? Well, it's hard to see the difference in the petals here. But if I see this W shape or this shape right here where I'm looking at this shape, I know in this W shape that this is this and this is this and this is this. So even if this gets confusing, I know what's here. I know that this thing that's sticking out right here and this right here is automatically this shape, come down here, that's that shape, this shape. So what'll happen when you do these negative shapes right here is it takes your paper from the edge in, make sure that these shapes are really strong, and it shows you how these shapes hold the inside shapes. So these shapes don't just start falling apart at the edges. I cannot emphasize enough how important negative space is. Sometimes we really love negative space in drawings, for example. Seeing this as negative space here and this as negative space here is as important as seeing this. This negative space has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shifts of color before it even gets to the mountain areas. Negative space can also have shapes within it. I see this cloud here. If I try to draw this cloud, it might seem kind of random. But if I see this blue shape here, or for example, I might see this floating shape here where I'm looking at this and I'm just seeing where that edge goes, it will profoundly alter your pieces. Good negative space makes a good photograph. Good negative space makes a great drawing. Good negative space shows that you're not being an amateur because you're not just putting this in the middle of your paper, but you're actually seeing what's happening as you go to the edges of your paper. So that is negative space.